Hey, Swamp Dweller, I just wanted to say that your podcast is amazing, and I hope it stays around for a long time. While listening to one of your recent episodes about crime, it reminded me of the times my brother and I used to go hiking together. For context, I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and on weekends, I would try to escape city life by exploring the mountains, checking out abandoned drainage tunnels, and my personal favorite, wandering down to the Rio Grande to explore the swampy desert landscape and see how things had changed. A lot has changed since then, though, and honestly, I don't have much interest in going back anymore. It was a mildly warm Saturday when we set out to hike the rocky trails. I had just earned my driver's license and was thrilled about the newfound freedom of driving places on my own. Thankfully, I wasn't alone this time, though. Both of my brothers were with me, and I was relieved to have the company. Things had definitely changed. As we walked, I noticed the amount of trash had doubled. Discarded bottles, old grocery bags, and every kind of litter imaginable were scattered across the dried-up riverbed. In the past, we had made efforts to pick up what we could, but now it seemed impossible without an entire team to help. Further along the trail, a ranger walked toward us. She stepped onto our path before veering off toward a homeless man who was fiddling with something in the dirt near a makeshift tent. They spoke briefly before she turned and headed back past us, while the man disappeared over a large pile of dirt. Nearby, another homeless man had set up camp, and he was staring at us. The moment he ducked into his tent, we decided it was best to move on. We retraced our steps and took another route that led us to the riverside. There, we found an empty soda can with a lizard stuck inside, a sad reminder of how pollution was damaging the environment. This wasn't the first time we'd come across something like this. On a previous visit, we had found another can of the same design with the same species of lizard trapped inside. Strange. We carefully cut open the can to free the creature, as the opening was too small for it to escape on its own. Continuing along the river, we stumbled upon another tent, this time surrounded by a pile of used toilet paper and human waste. Disgusted, we turned back and decided to follow the river in the opposite direction, but soon ran into another homeless man on the far side of the water. He was washing himself and drinking from the river. Without hesitation, we left the area and climbed back up to the main trail. As we passed the mound of dirt, we noticed the first homeless man had circled around and was now making his way up the main trail. My teenage brothers were usually pretty cautious, but my youngest brother, being the reckless one, climbed up to the top of the dirt mound and peered down. "Hey, there's another tent down here," he called out. "Get down," my older brother ordered, but he didn't listen. Instead, he started climbing toward it, not even thinking about whether someone might be inside. "Get back here now," I hissed, my voice carrying under the bridge we were standing beneath. Still, he ignored me and picked up a rock, tossing it toward the tent. That was the last straw. I stormed up the mound, yanked him down, and shoved him aside. He was furious, but I didn't care. Messing with someone's shelter was a dangerous game. It was time to leave, maybe even head home. Things felt off, and the place was nothing like I remembered. We climbed higher into the hills, hoping to distance ourselves from the area, but the further we went, the more tents we saw, along with piles of discarded magazines and rusted needles. If we ended up in a confrontation, I hoped the person would just let us pass. But it had been years since I had been here, and things were far worse than before. As we reached a patch of mesquite trees, we spotted another man. But this wasn't some scrawny guy in a tattered tent. He was at least 6 feet 3 inches and built like an athlete. He gave us a quick glance before vanishing into the trees. I didn't see which way he went, but I knew it was time to leave. Another homeless man had also begun slowly trailing us. We slipped into the brush, which was littered with makeshift shelters draped over low-hanging branches, but strangely, no one seemed to be inside. The tangled thorns overhead formed a canopy, making the space feel like a labyrinth. Then we heard it, something following us. I turned to my brothers. "Did you hear that?" They both nodded, likely trying to convince themselves it was just a rabbit to keep from panicking. But the sounds grew louder. Whatever it was big, bigger than a coyote. It sounded like a person, and it was moving through the brush fast, snapping branches as it got closer. "Run," I whispered. We crawled, ran, and squeezed through the thick vegetation, cutting our arms and legs in the process. The crashing sounds behind us were getting faster, closing the gap. We were exhausted, and at this point we had our knives drawn, prepared for the worst. If whoever was chasing us caught up, we were ready to fight. "There!" one of my brothers pointed. Up ahead, the bushes thinned, revealing a way out. We didn't hesitate. We bolted through the gap, scrambling up a steep rock wall. As soon as we reached the clearing, the pursuers stopped. We could hear the sounds of them retreating, thrashing back through the brush. Looking down the trail, we spotted a park ranger's truck parked in the distance. Relief washed over us. We were safe, but we didn't report what had happened. Who would believe us? Instead, we made our way back to the parking lot and piled into our old Honda Civic. I haven't been back to that trail since, and I don't plan on returning anytime soon. I had been dreaming about this trip for years, ever since I first fell in love with hiking as a young teenager. As I explored more trails with my friends, I learned about the Cross Nation Trail and immediately knew it was a must-hike for me, especially if I ever wanted to complete the Triple Crown of long-distance trekking. So when the day finally came for me to set foot on the path, I was beyond excited. The vast and breathtaking scenery was everything I had hoped for, filling me with a deep sense of adventure. With my backpack loaded with supplies, I was ready for several nights under the open sky. But as I made my way forward, I started noticing little things that felt off. At first, it was just a feeling. Something about the area unsettled me. Then, I stumbled upon something that made my skin crawl. I had been hiking for hours when I arrived at a clearing deep in the woods. Initially, I thought it was the perfect spot to set up camp, a peaceful, quiet place. But as I stepped closer, I noticed strange markings scattered across the ground. I had seen some odd symbols earlier in my journey, but these were much more distinct, and honestly, they sent a chill down my spine. Some of them even looked like they had been traced in dried blood. Among the markings, I saw eerie totems made from bones and twigs, standing like silent sentinels. The air itself felt thick, almost humming with something unnatural. It reminded me of places of worship, but not any kind I had ever seen before. This was something entirely different, something straight out of a nightmare. As I cautiously moved through the clearing, I saw them. A group of people dressed in long, flowing robes. Their faces were hidden beneath deep hoods, and they stood in a circle, murmuring in unison. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound was harsh, guttural, and unlike any language I had ever heard. A wave of dread washed over me. Every instinct screamed at me to get away. I know it sounds cliché, we've all seen the movies. The second I saw a group of people chanting something in an unknown tongue, I knew I needed to leave. But just as I turned to go, one of them must have noticed me. The chanting stopped abruptly, and one of the figures stepped forward with a deliberate, purposeful stride. Their gaze locked onto mine, intense and unwavering. I can't even put into words the sheer terror that gripped me when our eyes met. I tried to back away, but my body refused to move. It was as if I had been glued to the spot. The robed figure began speaking directly to me, but I couldn't understand a single word. It wasn't just another language, it was something wrong. Like the words themselves carried weight, pressing down on me. The more they spoke, the stronger my fear became. Then the others joined in. Their voices rose in unison, forming an eerie, almost hypnotic chant. I tried to run, but my legs felt like lead. My entire body was weak, drained, as if they had some kind of invisible grip on me. They were closing in, and I could see something in their eyes, an unnatural glow that made my stomach twist with fear. I knew without a doubt that I was in real danger. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then, just as suddenly as it all began, a bright flash of white light erupted in front of me, and in an instant they were gone. Every single one of them. The clearing was silent except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. I stood there, frozen, until I snapped back to my senses. I ran as fast as I could, never daring to look back. I didn't stop until I reached my car, miles away, my legs aching, lungs burning. But there was no way I was staying on that trail a second longer. I know what I experienced was real. Whatever I saw, whatever power those people had over me, it wasn't normal. It wasn't human. Some say it could have been an alien encounter, or maybe some strange residual energy tied to the land. Or perhaps I witnessed something beyond explanation, something from another dimension. I don't know how to describe it, and honestly, I don't think I ever will. But if anyone reading this has an idea of what I might have stumbled into, please let me know. I've always found peace in hiking through the Rocky Mountains. The crisp breeze, towering pines, and stunning views never fail to fill me with awe. Today felt no different as I made my way along the trail, soaking in the tranquility of nature. However, that sense of peace shattered in an instant when I locked eyes with something I never expected to see here. A cougar. It was crouched low to the ground, its piercing gaze locked onto me. My pulse quickened, a wave of panic washing over me. I had read about handling encounters like this, but actually facing one was far more terrifying than I ever imagined. I recalled that I needed to make myself look bigger and create loud noises to scare it away. At least that was the plan. Summoning my courage, I raised my arms high, trying to appear as large as possible, and began shouting and clapping. But the cougar didn't flinch. It remained fixed on me, its expression unreadable and eerie. Then, without warning, it lunged, fangs bared, claws extended. I stumbled backward, barely dodging its attack. My chest tightened as the reality of the situation hit me. This wasn't a warning. It was out for blood. I attempted to step away cautiously, but the cougar was relentless, closing the distance in seconds. I could feel its hot breath against my skin as it snarled, inches from my face. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest. I attempted to retreat again, but my foot caught on a loose stone, sending me crashing to the ground. This was the worst possible position to be in. Pain shot through me as its jaws clamped down on my arm. I screamed, desperately hoping someone nearby would hear, but the only response was the deep, guttural growls of the cougar. I knew I wouldn't survive if I didn't act fast, but what could I do? Frantically, my eyes darted around for anything useful. That's when I spotted a rock within reach. With everything I had, I grabbed it and struck the cougar as hard as I could. It let out a sharp cry and released me, just long enough for me to scramble to my feet and take off running. But the cougar wasn't done. It recovered quickly and was on my heels again, its powerful limbs propelling it forward at an incredible speed. I had no chance of outrunning it. I could feel its breath against my back, closing in once more. Then, just as I thought I wouldn't make it, I spotted a ranger station in the distance. Fueled by sheer adrenaline, I sprinted toward it, my legs burning with exhaustion. I crashed through the door, collapsing onto the floor, gasping for breath as I tried to explain what had happened. The ranger immediately called for an ambulance, and I was rushed to the hospital. I ended up with deep gashes on my arms and legs, along with countless bruises, but I was alive, and I knew how lucky I was. That day in the Rockies was the most terrifying experience of my life, and I will never forget the moment I felt those teeth sink into my flesh. As it turns out, a young cougar had recently been relocated to this area, and authorities suspect it was the one that attacked me. It may not have been skilled at hunting yet, which could explain why it viewed me as easy prey. Despite the attack, I hold no resentment toward wildlife. I don't fear bears or cougars, and I don't blame them for acting on instinct. But if there's one lesson I can pass on, it's this. Always stay alert, take every precaution, and never hike without some form of protection. A good deterrent spray could make all the difference in a moment like this. Several years back, I moved from a small town to an isolated valley deep in the wilderness, surrounded by a vast national park and only a handful of neighbors. It was exactly the kind of life I had been looking for. At that point, I had been working as a paramedic for about 5 or 6 years. Since I loved the outdoors and had a strong sense of community, I volunteered with a local search and rescue group. Despite being a small, underfunded operation, we stayed surprisingly busy. During the decade I was with them, we had at least one search and rescue mission every weekend from spring through fall. Most of these calls came from around 100 miles of rough fire trails, which were popular among dirt bike and ATV riders. Inevitably, they would get lost, crash, or get hurt, and we'd have to go out and find them, give medical care if needed, and either fly them out on a helicopter or load them onto a makeshift trailer towed by a quad. Not long after I joined, maybe 2 weeks in, I got my first call. I had no formal training beyond what I'd learned as a medic and a Boy Scout, but I was thrown into the deep end. A group of dirt bikers from the city had lost one of their riders. For some reason, they put their most inexperienced guy at the back of their group, which had about a dozen people. When they finished their ride and returned to the trailhead, they realized he was missing. They spent several hours searching on foot before finally calling emergency services. The time between their 911 call and us getting a team assembled at the trailhead was impressive. No more than 20 or 30 minutes, but we were already nearly 9 hours behind. We quickly went over maps, split into teams, and set out into the forest. I was paired with the most experienced member, and we took off on a quad. Each 2 or 3 person team took one of the main trails that circled the area, forming a large loop. The plan was to sweep those first and then move into the shorter, more maze-like inner trails. This was considered a hasty search, meaning we weren't doing a slow, detailed grid search, but rather scanning for signs as we moved. I had no idea what I was getting into. I expected dirt paths cutting through the forest, but these trails were a disaster, rough, technical terrain where if you didn't know what you were doing, you'd be in serious trouble. GPS barely worked because of the steep hills and dense tree cover. Radios and cell phones were hit or miss, and the maps didn't show all the unofficial trails riders had made on their own. Only the fire roads were properly marked, and those made up maybe 10% of the available routes. I still don't understand why they didn't pair this guy with someone or put him at the front. For hours in, I was covered in mud, scratched up from branches, exhausted, and just about done. We stopped for water when I caught broken radio chatter. Someone found the missing biker's dirt bike, but there was no sign of him. The location was only a few miles away, so we headed over. When we arrived, the bike was abandoned by the side of the trail, and the other team's quads were parked nearby. We followed them a few hundred feet into the forest and saw them gathered around the missing rider. He was lying on the ground, motionless, his arms spread wide. His lips were blue, his skin had a dusky tint, and his eyes appeared to be wide open and completely white. When I looked closer, I realized his eyes were actually covered in fly eggs. He had been dead for a while. It didn't make sense. His bike still had fuel, he had food and water, and he was young and seemingly healthy, only in his late 20s. Why was he dead? It looked like he had laid his bike down, run into the forest, and collapsed. We wrapped him in blankets, secured him to a stretcher, and transported him to the trailhead, where the coroner was waiting. About a week later, I ran into the coroner and asked what had caused his death. The medical examiner's conclusion was a fatal heart rhythm disturbance brought on by extreme fear. Basically, he was scared to death. Up until that point, I thought that kind of thing only happened in movies. I've always wondered what went through his mind in those final moments. Was he just terrified of being lost? If so, why did he leave the trail instead of staying on it? Or did he see something out there? I've heard plenty of stories about strange things in the woods, and I've witnessed a few odd occurrences myself, so I wouldn't be shocked if there was more to it. This story has always stuck with me because it's such a mystery. I just can't seem to make sense of it. I always liked hiking, just like a lot of people do, especially heading out to the state park near my town. The thick trees, the sound of birds, and the crisp, fresh air always made me feel at peace. I didn't live in a massive city, but I still had my fair share of stress, and hiking was my escape. I had no idea that one particular trip to clear my head would change the way I saw the world forever. It was a cool autumn morning when I decided to go for a hike. The trees had turned a fiery orange, and the sun shone brightly through the branches. I packed a small bag, laced up my boots, and set off down the familiar path. I was alone, but I didn't mind. The solitude of the woods was comforting. It was almost like therapy. After walking for a couple of hours, I noticed something strange. The forest had suddenly gone silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an eerie, complete stillness. It sent a small shiver up my spine, but I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe I was just imagining things. Then I heard a noise, a low, guttural growl coming from a cluster of bushes. In the unnatural silence, the sound was impossible to miss. My heart started to pound. I turned my head slowly, scanning the thick foliage. That's when I saw it. It was like a coyote, but not. Its fur was completely black, and its eyes were disturbingly human. The moment our eyes met, a deep chill shot through my body. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, almost frozen in place. I stumbled back, barely able to keep my footing on the uneven ground. Then I tripped, landing hard on the dirt. I turned back to look, expecting it to pounce, but it hadn't moved. It just stood there, its unsettling gaze locked on me. That's when it clicked. I had heard about things like this before on podcasts and in creepy stories online. Could it be one of those creatures? A skinwalker? Fear surged through me, and I scrambled to my feet. I didn't waste another second, I ran. As fast as my legs could carry me, I sprinted down the trail, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But then I heard it move. Faster than anything should be able to move. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel it getting closer. In seconds, I could almost sense its presence right behind me. My mind raced for a solution. I was lost, my bearings completely gone, and I hadn't been paying attention to any markers on the trail. Panic gripped me hard. Then I remembered something, an old story I had heard once. Something about these creatures not being able to cross running water. I had no idea if it was true or just folklore, but I was desperate. I frantically searched for any sign of water and, to my relief, spotted a small creek a short distance away. Without hesitating, I made a beeline for it. My lungs burned as I ran, and with one final push, I leaped over the narrow stream, landing hard on the other side. Heart pounding, I spun around. The creature was gone. Couldn't believe it. Had I really escaped? I stood there for a few moments, gasping for breath, my body trembling. Then I realized why it had stopped chasing me. Not because of the water, but because a group of hikers had appeared on the trail. I don't know if it had planned to go after them or if it had simply disappeared back into the woods, but I wasn't about to stick around and find out. I rushed back across the creek and followed the trail back to my car, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, my heart still hammering in my chest. From that day on, I never hiked alone again. The woods, no matter how peaceful they seem, can be home to things we don't understand. So if you ever find yourself out there, stay aware. There are plenty of dangers, bears, cougars, and maybe even things far worse. Keep your head up and don't make the mistake I did. Because sometimes, when the forest goes quiet, it means something is watching. I had been looking forward to this trip for a long time, and now that I was finally here, hiking deep into the vast wilderness, I felt more alive than I had in ages. The crisp air and the breathtaking landscape around me filled me with excitement and a sense of adventure. My backpack was loaded with all the essentials: my tent, supplies, and everything I needed for a few nights under the open sky. Hiking and camping had always been my passion, and out here, I felt completely in my element. But as daylight began to fade and dusk settled in, an odd feeling crept over me. The air seemed to turn colder, and the once peaceful woods now carried an eerie stillness. A strange sensation of being watched made the hairs on my arms stand up. I tried to shake it off, but as I continued along the trail, the unsettling feeling only grew stronger. As the last sliver of sunlight dipped below the horizon, I decided to set up camp for the night. I found a small clearing, quickly pitched my tent, and built a modest fire for warmth. Settling into my sleeping bag, I closed my eyes, but then I heard it, something moving just outside my tent. At first, I convinced myself it was just an animal, maybe a raccoon or a deer, but the more I listened, the more I realized it wasn't. The footsteps were far too slow, too heavy. It sounded like a person, but I was miles away from the nearest town. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, but the footsteps continued, circling my campsite through the night. I barely slept at all. By morning, I was exhausted. I packed up and decided to move on. But the moment I started walking, I heard them again, this time faster, louder, and coming from all around me. I picked up my pace, my pulse quickening, but no matter how fast I moved, the footsteps kept up. They were getting closer. I could hear heavy breathing, yet when I turned around, there was nothing there. It felt as if I was being chased by something invisible, something I could hear but not see. Panic set in, and I broke into a run, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps behind me grew more frantic. I tripped, crashing to the ground. Lying there, I felt a breath, cold and damp, against the back of my neck. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself for whatever was coming. And then, nothing. The footsteps stopped. I opened my eyes, and the forest was silent again. I could hear nothing but my own ragged breathing. Trembling, I pulled myself up and kept walking, never once looking back. I never spoke of that night to anyone, but even now, I can still hear those footsteps echoing in my mind, a chilling reminder of what lurks in the deep, untamed wild.